For millennia, the galaxy belonged to predators. Not metaphorical ones, but true apex hunters. Civilizations that evolved not through cooperation, but through domination. The stronger species didn't just survive. They consumed, enslaved, and erased the weak. Among them were the Vraxel, massive, armored beings who hunted entire planets for sport. The Qatari, hive-minded strategists who stripped systems of life with terrifying efficiency. And the Dren, stealth predators who could extinguish civilizations before they even realized they were under attack. There were no alliances, no mercy, only hierarchy. And at the very top, there was no one. No species had ever risen high enough to dominate the others. Balance existed only because every predator feared the cost of challenging another. Until humanity arrived. At first, they were ignored. A small, fragile species from an unremarkable blue world. No biological weapons. No natural armor. No claws. No fangs. They were prey. Or so the galaxy thought. Part 2. The first miscalculation. The Qatari were the first to test humanity. A scouting fleet entered the Sol system, expecting an easy harvest. Their scans showed primitive weapons and divided governments. Perfect targets. But something was wrong. Humans didn't respond like prey. Instead of fleeing or surrendering, they unified. Nations that had warred for centuries stood together within days. Their communications flooded space, not with fear, but with coordination. And then the Qatari ships began to disappear. Not destroyed in open combat. Not overwhelmed. Hunted. Human vessels moved unpredictably, striking from impossible angles. They used deception, sacrifice, and something no predator species understood. Strategy born from fighting each other. Within weeks, the Qatari fleet was gone. Not a single ship returned. The galaxy noticed. For the first time in recorded history, a predator had been out-hunted. Part 3. The War of Lessons. The Vraxel refused to believe it. They didn't hunt with caution. They hunted with dominance. They launched a full-scale invasion of Earth, confident their brute strength would crush the humans. At first, it seemed they were right. Cities fell. Defenses shattered. The Vraxel tore through human forces with terrifying power. But humans adapted. Every loss became data. Every failure became strategy. They learned the Vraxel's patterns, their arrogance, their predictability. And then the tide turned. Human forces began setting traps, turning entire environments into weapons. Oceans, storms, terrain, everything became part of the battlefield. The Vraxel weren't just fighting an enemy. They were fighting a species that evolved mid-war. By the end, the Vraxel didn't retreat. They ran. Part 4. The fear spreads. Now the galaxy understood. Humans were not prey. They were something far worse. Predators that learned faster than they hunted. The Dren attempted stealth extermination, targeting human leadership, infrastructure, communication networks. But humans had anticipated it. They created redundancies, decoys, false command structures. The Dren didn't eliminate humanity. They walked into a maze. One by one, their cloaked ships were exposed and destroyed. Their assassins hunted down by humans who had learned to see the unseen. For the first time, fear spread across the galaxy, not of destruction, but of being studied. Because every species humanity encountered became a lesson, and every lesson made them deadlier. Part 5. The Apex Realization. It wasn't a single battle that ended the age of predators. It was a realization. No species could defeat humanity, not because humans were the strongest, but because they refused to stay weak. Where others relied on instinct, humans relied on adaptation. Where others dominated, humans endured. And when the remaining predator species finally gathered, something unheard of, they didn't come to fight. They came to negotiate. Humanity didn't demand submission. They offered something far more unsettling: coexistence. Not out of weakness, but choice. Because humanity had proven something the galaxy had never understood. The true apex predator isn't the one who hunts the most. It's the one who decides when the hunt ends. The Qatari did not rush. They never did. In a galaxy ruled by impulse and dominance displays, the Qatari were different. Cold. Methodical. Their decisions were not driven by pride or hunger, but by calculation. Every action was weighed, every outcome modeled across thousands of predictive branches before a single command was issued. That was why they had endured. That was why they had consumed over 100 star systems without a single recorded defeat. So when the Sol system was finally marked for harvest, it was not an act of curiosity. It was a conclusion. Humanity had been observed for decades, their transmissions intercepted, their military capabilities analyzed, their internal divisions mapped and categorized. To the Qatari, humans were not an unknown threat. They were a solved equation. Primitive technology, fragmented governance, limited interstellar reach, low risk, high yield. The decision required no debate. A scouting fleet was dispatched, not an invasion force, not yet. Just enough to dismantle resistance, gather biological samples, and prepare the system for full consumption. 27 Qatari vessels slipped into the outer edge of the Sol system without announcement. Stealth was unnecessary. Prey did not need warning. The first human detection came from a deep space monitoring station orbiting beyond Pluto. The operators didn't understand what they were seeing at first: anomalies in gravitational readings, distortions that didn't match any known natural phenomenon. Then the signals resolved. Ships. Not human. The alert spread through Earth in minutes. At first, confusion followed. Then disbelief. Then something far more dangerous. Clarity. For the first time in human history, every major government, every military command, every intelligence network was facing the same undeniable reality. They were not alone. And whatever had arrived was not friendly. The Qatari expected panic. They expected chaos, fragmentation, competing responses from divided nations. It was the pattern they had observed in countless civilizations before their fall. Instead, they saw something they had never encountered: synchronization. Within hours, global communication networks shifted from civilian traffic to coordinated defense protocols. Nations that had spent decades locked in political and economic rivalry opened direct channels, sharing data, resources, and command structures. Military assets were mobilized, not in isolation, but as a unified system. The Qatari observed all of this. They recorded it. They did not understand it. From their perspective, it was inefficient, redundant, illogical. Independent factions relinquishing autonomy in favor of collective action. It contradicted everything they knew about survival hierarchies. But confusion did not equate to concern. Not yet. The Qatari fleet advanced. Their first target was not Earth. It was Mars. A small human colony, lightly defended, strategically insignificant. The Qatari chose it for a simple reason. Demonstration. They entered Martian orbit and deployed atmospheric disruption arrays, destabilizing communications and disabling orbital defenses within minutes. Ground installations fell silent soon after. From orbit, the Qatari transmitted a single signal toward Earth. A translation matrix followed, constructed from decades of intercepted human language. The message was simple: submit. On Earth, the message was received simultaneously across every major network. For 3 seconds, there was silence. Then humanity responded. Not with surrender, not with negotiation, but with action. The first human counterstrike did not come from Earth's orbit. It came from the darkness beyond Mars. 3 vessels, small, fast, and previously undetected, emerged from the shadow of a Martian moon. They did not broadcast. They did not engage in open combat. They targeted the Qatari command ship. The attack was precise, not overwhelming, not reckless, calculated. High-velocity projectiles struck key structural nodes, points that, to Qatari design logic, were non-critical, areas that no known species had ever targeted before, except the humans had studied them. The command ship's coordination systems failed. For the first time in Qatari history, a fleet lost synchronization. It lasted less than a minute. But it was enough. The remaining human forces moved immediately. Orbital platforms that had appeared inactive came online in coordinated sequence. Signals bounced between Earth, lunar, and hidden relay stations, creating a web of targeting data that shifted faster than the Qatari could process. Human ships didn't engage in formation. They scattered, individually weak, collectively unpredictable. They attacked from multiple vectors, some retreating, some advancing, some sacrificing position to expose vulnerabilities in Qatari defenses. To an outside observer, it would have looked chaotic. To the Qatari, it was incomprehensible, because it wasn't chaos. It was strategy shaped by centuries of internal conflict. Humans weren't fighting like prey. They were fighting like something that had spent its entire existence learning how to outthink an equal. Within hours, the Qatari fleet began to lose ships, not through brute force, through isolation. One by one, their vessels were separated from the collective, cut off from shared processing, and dismantled by coordinated human strikes. The Qatari adapted. They always adapted. But every adjustment they made, the humans countered. Faster, smarter, as if they had already anticipated the response. By the time the Qatari attempted a full retreat, it was too late. Human forces did not pursue recklessly. They hunted. Every escape vector had been mapped. Every possible trajectory calculated. The remaining Qatari ships vanished one after another, not destroyed in grand battles, but eliminated in controlled, deliberate engagements. The last transmission from the Qatari fleet never reached their home system, but fragments of it were later recovered by deep space listeners. Not a warning, not a call for reinforcements, just a single, incomplete conclusion. Not prey. Then silence. In the Sol system, the battle ended as quickly as it had begun. Mars was secured. Earth stood intact. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, a predator species had been hunted to extinction within a single engagement. Beyond the Sol system, the galaxy began to take notice. At first, it was dismissed as an anomaly, a statistical outlier. Perhaps the Qatari had underestimated an unusually resilient species. But as data accumulated, As observation probes confirmed the absence of the Qatari fleet, the truth became harder to ignore. Something new had emerged. Not a stronger predator. Something different. Because humanity had not won through dominance. They had won through understanding. And in a galaxy where every apex species relied on instinct and superiority, that made them something far more dangerous. The Vraxel did not believe in anomalies. In their history, there were only two explanations for unexpected outcomes: weakness or deception. And the Qatari had never been weak. That left only one conclusion. They had been careless. To the Vraxel, this was not alarming. It was insulting. For centuries, they had stood among the most feared hunters in the galaxy, not because of cunning nor subtlety, but because of overwhelming, undeniable force. Their bodies were living fortresses, their claws capable of tearing through alloy, their hides resistant to most known energy weapons. They did not outthink their prey. They overpowered it. So when reports spread of the Qatari fleet vanishing in the Sol system, the Vraxel did not hesitate. They did not convene councils or run predictive simulations. They prepared a hunt. Their armada was unlike anything humanity had faced before. Massive warships shaped like armored beasts, bristling with heavy weaponry designed not for precision, but for devastation. Where the Qatari had been surgical, the Vraxel were catastrophic. They did not approach quietly. They announced their arrival. When the Vraxel fleet entered the outer edges of the Sol system, they broadcast a message across every frequency, every human channel they could access. It was not translated. It did not need to be. The meaning was clear in tone alone. A challenge, a declaration, a promise of destruction. On Earth, humanity listened, and then they prepared. This time, there was no confusion, no hesitation. The unity forged during the Qatari encounter did not fracture, it solidified. Command structures were already in place. Communication networks already synchronized. But something had changed. Humanity had learned. They had studied the Qatari during the first battle, and now they had studied the galaxy's response. They knew the Vraxel would come, and they knew exactly how the Vraxel would fight. The first clash came near Jupiter. The Vraxel fleet surged forward in tight formation, weapons blazing in overwhelming volleys. Human defensive lines buckled under the assault. Ships were destroyed within seconds of engagement. Orbital platforms shattered. To the Vraxel, it was confirmation. This was how prey responded. Resistance, followed by collapse. They pushed forward, accelerating toward the inner system, confident that Earth would fall just as easily. They did not notice what the humans were doing. Not at first. Human ships did not hold position. They retreated, not in panic, but in pattern. Each withdrawal was measured, drawing the Vraxel deeper into the system, past Jupiter, past the asteroid belt, closer and closer to Mars, to Earth, to the very heart of human territory. The Vraxel welcomed it. They believed the humans were desperate. Cornered prey always ran toward its last refuge. What they didn't realize was that they were being guided. The first trap was simple. As the Vraxel fleet passed through a dense region of the asteroid belt, human forces triggered a series of controlled detonations, fragmenting massive asteroids into high-velocity debris fields. Combined with gravitational manipulation from hidden installations, the entire region became a chaotic storm of rock and metal. The Vraxel ships pushed through it. Their armor held, but their formation broke. For the first time, their advance slowed. That was when the second trap activated. Human ships re-emerged, not as a single force, but as dozens of independent units. They struck isolated Vraxel vessels with concentrated attacks, targeting joints in armor, weapon systems, propulsion nodes. They didn't try to overpower. They exploited. The Vraxel adapted quickly. They always did. Their ships tightened defensive protocols, re-establishing formation, pushing forward with even greater aggression. But every adjustment they made, the humans had already planned for it. Near Mars, the battle intensified. Human forces appeared to make a final stand, defensive lines forming around the planet, weapons firing in coordinated volleys. It looked like a last attempt to hold the line. The Vraxel charged. They broke through. And then, everything changed. Mars itself became a weapon. Hidden beneath its surface, humanity had constructed gravitational pulse generators, devices designed not for combat, but for planetary engineering. Now, repurposed for war, they unleashed a series of controlled distortions that warped local space just enough to disrupt Vraxel targeting systems. Not enough to destroy, just enough to confuse. For a species that relied on direct assault and visual dominance, even slight distortion was catastrophic. Human ships moved through the chaos with precision, because they had prepared for it, because they had tested it, because they had learned. The Vraxel were no longer fighting a battle. They were inside an environment designed to kill them. Losses mounted. Massive warships that had crushed entire civilizations began to fall, not in glorious clashes, but in fragmented, isolated engagements. One by one, they were dismantled. And still, the Vraxel pushed forward, because retreat was not in their nature. That was their final mistake. As the remnants of their fleet crossed into Earth's defensive perimeter, humanity executed the final phase. Everything they had learned, everything they had prepared, unleashed at once. Coordinated strikes from orbit, surface, and deep space converged on the remaining Vraxel ships. Their weakened formation shattered under the assault. Their command vessels, once symbols of invincibility, were reduced to drifting wreckage. For the first time in their history, the Vraxel hesitated, and in that hesitation, they broke. What followed was not a battle. It was a retreat, disorganized, desperate, unthinkable. The Vraxel fled the Sol system. Human forces did not pursue immediately. They didn't need to, because they had already proven something far more terrifying than victory. They had proven that they could take a species built for domination and teach it fear. Across the galaxy, the implications spread faster than any fleet. The Qatari had been erased. The Vraxel had been driven back. Two apex predators, defeated in completely different ways. Not by strength, not by instinct, but by adaptation. For the first time, the balance of the galaxy shifted. Because now, every predator species faced a question they had never needed to ask before. What happens when the prey learns how to hunt? The galaxy did not panic. Panic was for prey. Predators did not panic. They assessed, adapted, and acted. But beneath that cold, calculated exterior, something unfamiliar began to take shape. Uncertainty. The Qatari had been erased. The Vraxel had been driven into retreat. Two apex species, defeated not by a greater force, but by something that did not follow the established order. Humanity did not behave like prey, nor did they mirror the instincts of a traditional predator. They observed. They learned. And then they changed. That was what unsettled the galaxy, because adaptation was supposed to take generations. Humanity did it in the span of a single conflict. Among all the remaining powers, Only one species believed they understood how to deal with this anomaly. The Dren. If the Vraxel were brute force and the Qatari were inevitability, the Dren were precision. They did not wage wars. They ended them before they began. Their existence was barely confirmed. Entire civilizations had vanished without ever seeing their attackers. No fleet formations. No open battles. Just absence. Where others had failed against humanity, the Dren saw a simple solution. Do not fight them. Remove them. Silently. The operation began without warning. Across human space, subtle disruptions appeared, minor at first. Communication relays flickered offline. Remote outposts went dark. Supply routes reported brief signal loss before reconnecting. To most observers, it would have seemed like routine instability. To humanity, it was something else. A pattern. They had spent decades studying the ruins of extinct civilizations, tracing fragments of data, searching for consistency in disappearance. Now they were seeing it unfold in real time. Humanity did not wait for confirmation. They acted. Immediately, decentralized command protocols were activated. No single point of failure remained. Military authority dispersed across multiple independent networks. Civilian infrastructure mirrored the same design. If something, or someone, was attempting to sever the head, there would be no head to sever. The Dren continued. Their ships, cloaked beyond conventional detection, moved through human space like shadows. They targeted critical systems, data hubs, defense coordination centers, leadership nodes. But each strike produced unexpected results. Targets were empty. Facilities had already been evacuated. Command structures they dismantled turned out to be decoys. For the first time in their long history, the Dren encountered resistance, not through direct confrontation, but through anticipation. Humanity was not reacting to the attacks. They were predicting them. The first confirmed engagement occurred near one of Jupiter's outer relay stations. A human patrol, operating under passive detection protocols, identified a distortion, barely perceptible, but consistent with theoretical models derived from Dren behavior. They did not engage immediately. They observed. Then they triggered a localized scan pulse, tuned not to reveal the cloaked vessel directly, but to disrupt its masking field for a fraction of a second. It was enough. For the briefest moment, the Dren ship became visible, and that was all humanity needed. Within seconds, targeting data spread across the network. Human vessels converged, not in a chaotic swarm, but in precise coordination. The Dren ship attempted to vanish. It couldn't, because humanity had already adapted to the idea of invisibility. They didn't rely on sight. They relied on patterns. The Dren vessel was destroyed. The shockwave of that moment echoed far beyond the Sol system, because for the first time, something had seen the unseen. The Dren escalated. More ships, more targets, faster strikes. Entire human installations were attacked simultaneously across multiple systems. The intent was clear: overwhelm, break the pattern, force humanity into reactive chaos. But humanity did not fracture. They evolved. Civilian vessels were converted into mobile data nodes. Military fleets operated independently, yet remained synchronized through constantly shifting communication pathways. Artificial intelligence systems, once restricted, were deployed to analyze and predict Dren movement in real time. Every loss fed the system. Every attack refined the response. The Dren were no longer hunting blindly. They were being studied. Weeks passed, then months, and gradually, the pattern reversed. Human forces began locating Dren vessels before they could strike. Ambushes replaced defenses. Traps replaced reactions. Entire Dren strike groups vanished, not because they failed, but because they were expected. Hunted. The final engagement was not a battle. It was a collapse. A cluster of Dren ships, attempting a coordinated strike on a newly established human colony, entered a region of space that appeared unremarkable, empty, unprotected. It was neither. The moment they initiated their attack, the trap activated. Gravitational distortions, sensor interference, and coordinated human fleets closed in from every direction. Cloaking fields failed under sustained disruption. Escape vectors disappeared. For the first time in their existence, the Dren were exposed, and they were not ready. The engagement lasted minutes. When it ended, nothing remained. No wreckage, no survivors, only silence. Across the galaxy, the realization settled in. It was no longer just about defeat. It was about comprehension. Humanity had faced 3 apex predators, each fundamentally different in nature, and they had adapted to all of them. The Vraxel had strength. The Kotari had unity. The Dren had invisibility. Humanity had taken each advantage and turned it into a weakness. That was when the fear truly began. Not fear of destruction, not fear of extinction, but fear of something far worse. Understanding. Because every species now realized the same terrifying truth. If humanity encountered them, they would learn them, and once they learned them, they would never lose to them again. The galaxy did not descend into chaos. It did something far more unnatural. It became quiet. For the first time in known history, predator species stopped expanding. Hunting fleets that once roamed freely through the stars were recalled. Border systems, long contested and soaked in the remnants of countless extinct civilizations, fell silent. No one advanced. No one provoked. Because now, there was something in the galaxy that could not be predicted. Humanity. They had not claimed vast territories. They had not wiped out entire species in acts of dominance. They had not declared themselves rulers. And that was what made them so dangerous. Every apex species understood power. They understood conquest, hierarchy, fear. But restraint was incomprehensible. It suggested something beyond instinct. It suggested choice. Across distant star systems, in territories once controlled by the Vraxel, Kotari, and Dren, something unprecedented began to occur. Signals. Not threats. Not demands. Messages. Encrypted, carefully structured, broadcast toward human space. For the first time, predators were reaching out, not to challenge, but to communicate. Humanity received them all. They did not respond immediately. Instead, they did what they had always done. They studied. Each signal was analyzed for patterns, intent, hidden meanings. Cultural fragments were reconstructed from data. Behavioral models were refined. Humanity was not preparing for war. They were preparing for understanding. Weeks passed, then months. The silence stretched across the galaxy, heavy with anticipation. Finally, humanity answered. Not with fleets, not with weapons, but with a single transmission. It was broadcast across every known frequency, encoded in a format that any sufficiently advanced species could interpret. The message was simple, but its implications rippled through every corner of the galaxy. We will not hunt you, unless you hunt us. There was no threat in the words, no arrogance, only certainty. For many species, the message was more unsettling than any declaration of war, because it did not come from a position of weakness. It came from control. The Vraxel were the first to respond. Once symbols of unstoppable dominance, their fleets had withdrawn to fortified regions of space, their numbers diminished, their confidence fractured. Their reply was not a challenge. It was an inquiry, a question about boundaries, territory, coexistence. The Qatari, or what remained of them, followed. Their hive structure had been disrupted by the loss of their fleet, forcing a re-evaluation of their expansion protocols. They sought not conquest, but survival. Even the Dren, long hidden in the shadows, sent fragmented signals, cautious, indirect, but undeniable. The galaxy was changing, and humanity stood at the center of it. Not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as something entirely new, a balancing force. Human exploration resumed, but differently now. Where once they had moved cautiously to avoid detection, they now moved openly, though never aggressively. Outposts became meeting points rather than fortresses. Communication replaced silence. Slowly, carefully, first contact transformed into first dialogue. There were no grand alliances, no sudden unity. Trust, in a galaxy shaped by predation, could not be built overnight. But it began, and that alone was enough to reshape everything. Of course, not all species accepted this new reality. There were always those who clung to old instincts. One such species, minor compared to the fallen giants, but still formidable, chose to test humanity. They launched a surprise assault on a remote human colony, believing distance and speed would give them the advantage. They were wrong. The response was immediate, precise, overwhelming. Human forces arrived not in chaos, but in perfect coordination. The attacking fleet was dismantled in minutes, their ships disabled or destroyed with calculated efficiency. There was no prolonged battle, no drawn-out conflict, just a demonstration. And when it was over, humanity did something unexpected. They stopped. They did not pursue the fleeing remnants. They did not retaliate against the species' home system. They let them go. The message was clear. Humanity could destroy them, but chose not to. That choice echoed louder than any victory. Across the galaxy, the final realization settled in. The age of unchecked predation was over. Not because a stronger hunter had emerged to dominate all others, but because something far more dangerous had taken its place. A species that could hunt, but chose when not to. A species that could destroy, but preferred not to. A species that had faced the worst the galaxy had to offer, and adapted beyond it. The concept of an apex predator had always been simple. The strongest, the most feared, the one at the top of the hierarchy. But humanity redefined it, because true dominance was not about constant victory. It was about control. Control over conflict. Control over fear. Control over themselves. And in that control, humanity achieved something no other species ever had. They ended the hunt, not by force, but by proving they could always win it. In the vast silence of space, where predators once ruled without question, a new truth now existed, quiet, undeniable, and permanent. The galaxy no longer feared the strongest species. It feared the one that didn't need to prove it.